I'm sat in my living room, I've got my Sculpt in front of me, I've got Discord there, PureRef up there, Spotify up there. Life is golden. A couple of months ago I made a video of me sculpting Jinx using the brilliant virtual reality software ShapeLab, which by the way you can currently get at 30% off perpetual license from the Meta PC VR store or the ShapeLab website. Well, since I made that video, the geniuses behind ShapeLab have been working away to bring us a bunch of new tools, and in this video we're going to have a look at those tools. And then in the second part of this video I'm going to put those tools to the test by sculpting my entry for this month's Danny Mac 3D challenge, which, in case you missed the last video, the theme is Overwatch, so I'm going to be sculpting D.Va. I hope you enjoyed the video. Okay, so the first new feature that we're going to look at is an outstanding quality of life update. Now, before the update, the way you would select a brush is you would either lift up your left hand and select it from the brush menu over here, or you would use the thumbstick on your right hand to cycle through the different brushes, and you can see it changing there. The problem with this is, first of all, lifting your left hand up and selecting it like this feels a little bit sluggish if you're used to working digitally. So I almost exclusively use the right thumbstick. But the problem with this is that if you wanted to go from, let's say, your standard brush over to your flattened brush, that's quite a lot of steps to get there. And unfortunately, this brush menu isn't customizable. That's where this new update comes in, and this is awesome. So the new way to select brushes is, I mean, you can still do it the old way if you want to, but the much more convenient way is you just press A on this controller and you get this pie menu here, and this pie menu is highly customizable. Let me show you this. So if I just come to my options underneath controller, down here to customize, look at all these options you get here. So you can change the amount of slots that you've got in this menu. You've got a bunch of different customizations for the actual pie menu itself, and then you've got all your brushes over here so that you can put your brushes wherever you want, and then you can get used to gesturing in a certain way, and you can select your brushes so much quicker with this. I really appreciate this update, ShapeLab. This is just an awesome quality of life update. So I'm going to turn the slots right up to 10 because I like to be able to get as many brushes from this menu as I can because it's really convenient. And just so you can see how easy it is to set this up, all you do is just grab your brush, drag it over like that. And if you want to switch them around, just drag them around like that. It is so easy, really convenient, such a good update. Thank you, ShapeLab. Let's say you're working away, you're throwing some shapes together, you're remeshing it, and it's getting a little bit high poly and difficult to work with. That's where your next three features come in, and they work together quite nicely. So first off, we've now got a new quad remesher. So this is a little bit different to remesh. So if I just, so I've got this hand here in front of me. This has been, I've been using this using the normal remesh function. So let me just turn on wireframe, and you can see the topology that we're working with here. And it's quite high poly, and we could do with bringing that down a little bit. Now, before I do anything, I'm just gonna duplicate this model. So I come into object mode, or scene mode, should I say. I'm just gonna clone this, and then I'll hide the clone. Now, the first of these new features is a quad remesher. So you're used to the remesh, which gives us this kind of topology. But if I just bring this menu up, you can see we've got a voxel remesh. That's what this looks like. But quad remesh, let's just turn this down, and we'll say about 6,500 polys. Maybe I'll just turn it up slightly more, maybe 7.7. Hit apply, it's gonna do its thing, and now we have much nice topology on that hand. Look at that, that is really nice. Now, when you drop this many polygons, you've got to expect a little bit of loss of detail, but we can bring that back. Now, first of all, is an absolutely awesome update, and I'm so glad that we now have this in ShapeLab. I promised it in my last video, and that is multi-resolution. We can now have subdivision levels right here in ShapeLab, which is really cool. So I can just subdivide this model, subdivide it once, subdivide it again, and now we can just move between levels 1, 2, and 3, and it even tells you how many polygons each level is. And you can also, so if I just undo out of that, you can also tell it how smooth you want these subdivisions to be. I usually put that right up to the top. So now we have our hand back, it's got subdivision levels, but we could do with bringing back those higher res details. Now for that, we have another new feature, which is detail projection. So this is like your project all button in ZBrush. If I remember rightly, it has been a while, and it works. I mean, it works as you would expect it to. So let me just come over to detail transfer, and we need to be in scene mode for this. I need to jump into scene mode anyway so I can bring back our original hand, and what we're going to do is project the details from the original hand onto the new hand, which is really awesome because if you've seen any of my recent videos, you'll know that when it comes to retopology, I haven't been doing it from scratch very much recently. What I've been doing is bringing the good topology from a previous model and then projecting the details from my sculpt onto the new topology, which is what I did the last time I was in ShapeLab. However, because we didn't have that feature, I had to jump into Blender. So it's really nice that I can do it right here in ShapeLab now. It's really awesome. So let's see it in action then. Let me just bring back the original hand. And so we're in scene mode, and all we need to do is select the source object. So I'm just going to make sure I've got the right one selected there. I think that's right. Should have really renamed this, but there you go. And then I wonder if I can just hide this so that we can see it clearly. If I just hit apply, did you see the movement there? So before we projected the details and then after. Okay, so that's super nice. And of course, we now have as well subdivision levels to work with. So if I come down to level 1, we'll turn on wireframe so you can see this. Up to level 2, level 3, this is such a nice workflow. So we've gone from a high-res messy model to a clean model with subdivision levels and without any loss of detail. Really nice stuff. So there are now a bunch of new matte caps to choose from, which is super nice. However, the thing that I'm more interested in is the fact that you can now import your own matte caps. I'm really liking that ShapeLab is making its software more customizable. I think this is really the right path to go down, in my opinion. But what this means is that you can now choose from thousands of matte caps that are available online, and you can even just import the ones from ZBrush right into ShapeLab. You just select your matte cap, come over to the materials panel, choose create matte cap texture, and then in the image panel you can export a TIFF. Now at the minute, ShapeLab only lets you import them as PNGs, so you'll need to find a way to convert it. I'll just use Photoshop, and then I can come to the matte cap menu in ShapeLab and import the new matte cap. So I'll just add that there, and that's now available. It's actually available twice because I already did it, and our hand is now using that sketch matte cap right from ZBrush. Really cool stuff, I really like that. Now another quality of life update, which at first might seem insignificant, but for me I think this is actually really nice, and it is flat shading. So first of all, let me just turn it off so that you can see what this looks like. So let me turn wireframe off as well. Previously we only had smooth shading. Now at the minute this model is smooth shaded, and the problem with it is that when you're looking directly at the model, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. Now previously I would counteract this by using wireframe, and with wireframe I have a much better view over what's going on with this model. If I just turn that off, you can see the difference, how the wireframe just gives you a bit more information on what's happening with the model. However, we don't need this anymore. What we have now is flat shading. So when I turn flat shading on, can you see how, so this is a little bit high poly. Let me just come down in resolution. You can see how you get a lot more information on what the model is doing. Let me just switch it to smooth. You see that's smooth, that's flat. And we also have flat and sharp as well. So we can really see what's going on with this model. And when I'm working in Blender, I have flat turned on pretty much all the time. So for me, this is a really significant update, even though it might seem simple. Again, thank you ShapeLab, this is super cool, really awesome. Now this is slightly different to what we used to in Blender, in that in Blender we see, so let me just turn on wireframe, the shading is quadded, whereas in ShapeLab you can see that it's actually triangles. So it might take a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of getting used to, but this is definitely a welcome improvement and will help a lot with sculpting for sure. Now this next update is massive and it's also experimental, and for this I'm actually going to take you back into my office, because this update is on the computer. Right, so we do have, as I say, a desktop mode in here because some things are just easier to do on the computer. So, for example, I've just been talking about how I should have renamed these things in my outliner. This is so much easier to do here on your computer because we've got a keyboard, so I'll just put hand. Just like that. And using a controller, I mean, you can do it and it's convenient to not have to take the headset off, but you know, if you've got a lot of stuff that you need to rename, this is a lot easier. And I do also personally prefer to transform my objects on my computer as well. So I do find it easier to use a mouse to move stuff around like this. So when I'm in scene mode, for me, it's generally the scene mode stuff that I find useful to do on a computer. And a reason that I personally think that desktop mode is really important is because the final piece, at least for me, is gonna be viewed on a 2D screen. And while it is really nice being able to see your model in 3D space with your headset on, you need to know how your model is looking on a 2D screen as well, since that's how people are gonna see it. You know, unless you're sculpting for 3D printing or something like that. But I mean, even then, you're probably gonna be viewing it on a 2D screen as well. And another quick reason that I did just want to throw in there is that measuring stuff is easier on a flat screen versus in reality. So things like checking your proportions is easier. I mean, just think about it. Imagine measuring a person with a tape measure versus measuring a person on a screen with a tape measure. It's just easier when it's in 2D, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Now, as I said, this desktop mode is experimental and there's still a lot of stuff that isn't working yet. So we don't have pen pressure in desktop mode yet. So, you know, don't expect it to have all the bells and whistles of, let's say, ZBrush or anything like that, but is definitely a very positive step in the right direction, in my opinion. Oh, and I forgot to mention at this point that they are working on pen pressure support. I'm assuming that'll be along with the next update. I'm not sure, but they are working on it. And they are also, might as well just mention now while we're here, working on custom HDRI environments, which will be really nice as well, because it'll mean a bit of custom lighting. That'll be nice. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks, ShapeLab. And you know, you've got access to all the tools you've got when you've got the headset on. Tab into sculpt mode, into scene mode. You've got all your menus down here that you have with the headset on, and all the other menus over here as well. Really nice. I really like it. It's just a lot easier for doing a lot of different things that are just easier when you're working on your computer. Now, while we're in desktop mode, I'll just go over some other quality of life updates. We now have parenting. So in the outliner, you can just drop an object onto another and make it its child. So now any transforms also affect its children. We can now multi-select, so we can transform multiple objects at once. And we can also adjust in the transform panel and select if you want the transform center to be group or object. We now have selection grouping, which allows us to save selections as groups to easily reselect groups of objects. There are new stroke mode adjustments for additional brushes, including inflate, smooth, trim, flatten and pinch. You can now change alphas for the trim brush, offering more customization and control. You can completely hide the brush and UI palette, making the working space cleaner. And there's also a bunch more quality of life updates which you find on the website, which I will link in the description below. Now, before we get on to sculpting our character and trying all these updates out, there is one last update that I think is really awesome that I want to show you next, as well as a couple of extra bonus tips that I had based on some of the comments that I received from my last video and also from the discussion in the ShapeLab Discord as well, because I think this is going to help a few of you out. Now, to do this, I do actually need to change the whole way that I'm recording this so that you can actually see what it is that I'm seeing. So I'll do that now and I shall be back in just a moment. So we're back in the living room and you are essentially seeing through my eyes. You are seeing what I see when I'm in my living room, and this is a little intimate for my liking, but do you know what? It's necessary just to show you this next feature. Now, ShapeLab runs on my computer, which is in the next room, but it gets streamed over to this headset. So there must be a software in between that sends all that data over here, and there's actually 3 that you can choose from that I'm aware of. There's AirLink, which comes with the Quest. there's Steam Link, which is the one that I used when I recorded the last video, or there's Virtual Desktop, which is the one that I use now. And the reason I use it now is because you get a lot more options. So if you end up with any problems, you can just tweak the settings in Virtual Desktop and improve your experience. Anyway, you get a lot more options when you're working with Virtual Desktop. One of those options is configuring your virtual environment. Now I do actually have a virtual desktop screen over here. This is like my main monitor. That's why it's going all funky. I did actually have more screens. I'm not actually sure what I've done. I think I've pressed the wrong setting, but you can actually have all your computer screens lay out in front of you. It's really cool. But if I just press this and come to my settings for virtual desktop, notice we have this VR pass-through, and if I click configure, we can set the color of essentially a green screen. And what ShapeLab have done, have made it so that you can set the environment that you're working in to be a color that you can key out with virtual desktop like this. And I'm just going to change the settings very slightly, because when I tested it earlier, it wasn't quite right. And I think these settings were where I got the closest. They could be tweaked even more for a better result, I'm sure. But I'm just gonna go with 33 and 7. I'm just gonna press close. What I'm gonna do is launch ShapeLab so that I can show you this, because honestly, this is so cool. When I read in the notes that they'd introduced this, I was like, that's fine, that sounds like it'll be fun. But when I actually tried it out, I was blown away by this. So the way I'm going to launch into ShapeLab is by launching Steam VR. Now this is going to be important for these bonus tips that I mentioned as well. Steam VR is a nice little in-between app that you can use for all sorts of stuff. Now I can't actually see anything now because nothing in my environment right now is bright green, but once we have something that's bright green in the environment, it's gonna be see-through. Okay, so I'll just bring up my desktop and you can actually see my Spotify icon there, which is obviously green, is actually see-through. So I'll just launch ShapeLab. Now, obviously, this is the environment that we've been working in so far. So let's change that. Let's come over to our environments, scroll down, and you can see we have these 3 chroma key colors here. If we click on blue, it's going to make the entire environment blue. Click on pink, it's going to make it all pink. And then the one in the middle that we can't see because it's being keyed out, I can look through this menu into my living room, is the green. If I select that, we can now sculpt. I'm sat in my living room. I'm sat on my sofa. You could even be sat on your bed if you want to. It's really weird to me right now that this ball isn't appearing in the monitor on top of my camera. That's funny, but how awesome is this? Like I said, I was not that bothered about this when I saw it in the notes, I'll be honest, but sitting here with this in front of me like this is just, it's mind-blowing. You need to give it a try. I mean, it's 30% off at the time that this video gets up. I can't quite remember how long the discount is gonna go for, so get yourself over there, check if it's still on discount, depending on when you watch this, and give it a go, because like I said, this is, I mean, it's so much fun. Let me tell you. Let me just turn those settings down there. So now I want to show you these bonus tips that I was on about. Now, you saw that I loaded this up in Steam VR. So if I just press this button, I'll bring up the Steam VR overlay. And I am just gonna turn off green screen for now, and I'll just put it on our Loft Art Studio. I like this one. Now, let's say I want to use PureRef while I'm sculpting in ShapeLab, and this is what I've seen people requesting this feature, to use PureRef, to use their web browser, to use other stuff that's on the computer while they're sculpting. You can do that. So if I just bring up my Steam UI overlay, and I've got a PureRef file with a bunch of reference images open on my computer now. So if I add a desktop window and then I grab that PureRef file, you can see I've got all my references here, but you might be like, okay, but once you turn the overlay off, it disappears. What's the point in that? Well, what you can also do is click this floating world button here, and I might shrink it down a little bit, push it up there, and then once you come back, it's still there. You can still see all your references. You come back to your overlay, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can move around. This is awesome. So I've got PureRef right here. Now, do be aware that it does overlay everything. So if I was to move this object up, it's going to go behind that. So it does overlay whatever you're working on. So that is something to be aware of, which is why I stuck it up there. But what this also means is that I can also have Spotify. And by the way, you don't have to just float it in the world. You can just dock it on your controller. So I've just docked it on my right controller there, and I don't know how to get it off, hang on. Let's bring that back. Or you can dock it on your left controller. So now I've got Spotify docked on my left controller, and so I'm sculpting away. I mean, it's really impractical, but you can do this. Like, you could have your references. You could have Pure Ref right here. So you're looking at your references, making adjustments over here. It's really cool. So let me just pop that back, and I'll also just float that in the world. Can have my music going on up there. I'd usually put it quite high up so that when I'm sculpting away, it doesn't get in the way, and if I'd want to skip track or whatever, just look up, next track, and then carry on sculpting. And also, we could have a Discord going on over here as well. Okay, so if we combine this now with pass-through, okay, so I'll select the chroma key green. So now I'm sat in my living room, I've got my sculpt in front of me, I've got Discord there, Pure Ref up there, Spotify up there. Life is golden. It's awesome. I'm so excited to see where this technology is already. I mean, it's already outstanding where we are now, and it's still so young, you know. So get hold of ShapeLab, give it a try, because I think there's big things happening here, and I think VR sculpting is definitely on its way in. I like it a lot. Okay, so I am actually going to move on from this now, because I am conscious that the quality of the video that you're seeing now, the way I can show you this overlay, I have to record the video in a slightly different way, and I'm conscious that the quality isn't as good as when I record in other ways. But we are now going to move on to actually sculpting a character with ShapeLab, and I'm going to be doing this for my Dynamak 3D challenge, which is a monthly challenge. And the theme for this month was Overwatch, and I've decided that I'm going to sculpt D.Va. Now, I also want to try and get out to you 2 videos per month, and I want those videos to have a bit of a payoff as well. So the way I've decided to structure these videos is that in the first 2 weeks of the month, I'm gonna create a portrait of whatever character I'm doing, and then in the last 2 weeks of the month, I'm gonna finish off the rest of the body and everything. So it's gonna be a bust of D.Va in this video this week. I hope you enjoy. I got to work on the default sphere, and immediately it's a +1 for the update, because for me the default sphere is too high poly for my liking, and the last time that I did this I had to delete it and add in a new lower poly primitive, but this time I was able to just unsubdivide a couple of times and crack on with work. And then we have another 2+ points for the smooth shading and the pie menu to select brushes too. And I'm already finding ShapeLab so much easier to work with thanks to these 2 little simple features. As I was working here, I remembered just how nice it is to have your model right there in front of you. And it's really hard to explain, especially if you've never tried VR before, but when you see the model go large on the screen, the size is constrained by the size of your screen. But to me, it's absolutely huge. And what it means is that you can get really detailed with it. If you can enlarge the head to be like the size of a house, think how detailed you can get with that. It's really nice. I kind of forgot how nice that was. Now at the moment, I'm using my usual workflow of remeshing at a low resolution, and then gradually remeshing at higher resolutions as the sculpt progresses. Now the brushes definitely behave slightly differently than they do in Blender, which is to be expected, but it does mean that there is a bit of an adjustment period. And also, you kind of need to get your eye in too. And while it's obviously great to be able to see your 3D model in 3 dimensions, when you've been working on a 2D screen for years, it can be tricky to understand how that model will look once it's on a 2D screen, if that makes sense. So it's really nice that there's now a desktop mode, because I can just lift the headset off and see how it's looking. With practice though, I'm pretty sure that my eye will adjust to the point that I don't even need to do that anymore. A nice perk of working in VR is that you don't have to sit at your desk, and you don't have to stand up like I have been doing. In fact, you can just sit on your sofa, so that's what I'm about to do now. In fact, you can sit anywhere you want as long as you've got a Wi-Fi connection with your PC. You could even do a bit of sculpting laying in bed. So now I'm just sculpting the head as you've seen me do a million times before, except now it's in VR. Now, I got a few comments on my last video saying how this will cause headaches, but I must say, the only time I've experienced anything like this is when my settings haven't been right and I wasn't getting the right frame rate. So if this is something that you are concerned about, I would just recommend dropping your settings to see if that helps. And you know, even when I dropped my settings, I didn't notice any difference in how Shapelab looks either. So it's not like it really matters that much. And yeah, again, I personally recommend Virtual Desktop for this because you do get a lot of settings to control this, but I'd need to check what the recommendations from Shapelab is. And now here you can see me testing out the desktop version. Now as I say, it is experimental and there's a few things missing like pen pressure, but it is really nice how quickly you can jump into desktop mode and check how the model is working on a 2D screen. Now I know it might look a bit soon to retopologize this, especially if you're used to finishing a sculpt before retopology. But what good topology will do is allow us more control over the mesh and also allow us to use a multi-resolution workflow. And I'm also keen to test out the new detail projection because what we can do is import ahead with good topology. Then I'll spend a little bit of time roughly matching the good topology mesh to the sculpt, just to make life a bit easier for the software. Then I can project the sculpt onto the good topology and carry on working from there. And as I say, since we now have good topology and also subdivision levels, we have a lot more control over the mesh. Now a question I sometimes get asked about this workflow is why not just start with good topology in the first place? Why bother creating a sculpt? Why not use a base mesh? And this is a valid question, and the main reason I start from a sphere rather than a base mesh is that it forces me to understand the underlying forms each time I do it, and I'm not relying on that already being made for me, if that makes sense. I mean, that's probably like 80% of the reason, and then the other 20% is that it's just more fun to do it from scratch. Now, when I created Jinx in VR, I had to bounce over to Blender a few times by this point. I used Blender to unsubdivide the mesh, I used Blender for retopology, I used Blender to check how it looked in 2D, but this time, thanks to the new updates, I've avoided having to use Blender at all up until this point. And if you're a sculpting purist, you could quite easily finish this up right here in Shapelab too. However, because I don't just work with sculpting tools, and remember Shapelab is a sculpting tool and it's not trying to be more than that like Blender is, I will now need to hop over to Blender for most of the rest of this project. And this is so that I can use the non-sculpting tools like modeling tools for hard surface objects like the headphones, and also curves so that I can get to work on the hair, which by the way I'm keeping a little more simple in shape than I normally would because I might end up converting this into geometry node hair again. Then I also use the retopology tools, which are essentially modeling tools, to create the rest of the clothing, using the sculpt from Shapelab as our base model to build everything from. I also tend to texture most objects procedurally too, and since this is going to get rendered in Blender, I'm creating those here as well. But I was able to jump back to Shapelab to paint the skin texture, which was fun. Then it was back to Blender to finish off all the materials. I may have forgotten the face paint in Shapelab, but I just added that final touch of Blender. Then I created a really simple rig and got to work posing her before it was time to render. So before we see the result of this D.Va bus, I just want to say I think Shapelab have knocked it out of the park with this update, and I'm basing that, as I say, on how less I need to travel back to Blender compared to before the update, but also for things like the UI update for selecting brushes, which I wasn't expecting at all. So I was really pleasantly surprised, and I'm super excited to see what we get in the next update of Shapelab. You know, besides what I mentioned about pen pressure and custom HDR environments. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is my bust of D.Va sculpted in virtual reality in Shapelab.